But there is a word that has been used a lot this week about WWE when it comes to some of the talents on the roster, and that word is frustration. The word of the day, boys and girls, is frustration. Frustration about the way that they are being used or not used. And frustration about being left off the SummerSlam card altogether. Case in point, Becky Lynch, Trish Stratus, and Rhea Ripley. Rhea was there last night. She came out briefly during the World Heavyweight title match, so technically she was on the show. But she was the Women's World Heavyweight Champion with no match on the show. Now, they may not be ready to put her and Raquel in the ring together. That feud is only just getting started. But with all the weeks that they had to plan this show out, to not come up with a match for Rhea Ripley is pretty ridiculous. Now, Becky and Trish have been feuding for months, and I wouldn't exactly call it great. So the fact that they got left off the SummerSlam card in favor of some other stuff is nothing that bothered me, because, again, it's not like they've been lighting the world on fire. They're going to be having a match on TV in Winnipeg. Not this week, but next week. Triple H was asked about this at the post-show press conference, and he made the claim, because somebody was like, their match being cut or bumped from the show, and he said, well, that's not exactly what happened, because their match was never announced for the show. Please. It's all a matter of semantics. He's playing games. There's no way that when that match with Becky and Trish was first conceived, that the idea was to not do it at SummerSlam at Ford Field, and to keep them off the show so they could do the match 2 weeks later on an episode of Monday Night Raw. Of course they were left off the show. They were left off the show due to time constraints, and I don't blame them. They were 8 matches deep last night, and the show still went past midnight. Looking back at it, in hindsight, Ronda against Shayna should have been cut. Put Becky and Trish on there instead. They would have had a better match. But, Ronda was not going to be left off the show, especially if it was her final match. They're not going to bump her to television. They're going to have her at SummerSlam. But at the end of the day, unless you cut something else or you shorten the length of some of the matches, there just wasn't any room for Becky and Trish. They have every right to be upset about it. They were posting very passive-aggressively, let's say, on social media. So obviously they're upset that they didn't get to be part of the show in front of 50,000 people. I would be too. But there just wasn't any room for it. That's the way it goes sometimes. Sheamus. He was in the Battle Royal last night, but he's also been frustrated. He gave an interview to the Daily Star in the UK, and he told them that he feels the company didn't capitalize on the organic momentum that he had coming out of last year's Clash at the Castle. About losing to Gunther, he said, I'm not upset about that at all. I felt it was great. It was just the type of character Sheamus is, all fits and elbows. What I was upset about and what really bothered me was the creative after that. I came out of that with so much organic momentum and it was just wasted. It didn't go anywhere. It was a dead end, just like with WrestleMania. Drew went away because he was injured, but I was ready to go and then just nothing. There was no avenues, or there were no avenues and nowhere to go, and that's frustrating. I did the War Games thing after Clash at the Castle, but that was shit. That's how I felt, though others might have felt differently. And on the story of him chasing the one title in WWE that he has never held, which is the Intercontinental title, he said it's still a fresh story. Even with Gunther and Drew's match at SummerSlam, people are still mentioning me because that's still my story. I would definitely like to retire with it, but that stuff is out of my control. I can just do what I can do. I still believe Sheamus should have won the title at WrestleMania. Having Gunther and Roman Reigns both retain on the same night and not having at least one of them lose was certainly a choice that WWE made. I think what worked against Sheamus was the fact that we're in the middle of these two historically long title reigns for both men that WWE was just not ready to end. And outside of the U.S. title, what else was there for Sheamus to go after? So I think more than anything, he was just a victim of bad timing. That timing just so happened to come at a time when he was more over than he's ever been at any other single point in his entire career. So I can understand him feeling that way, that he had all of this momentum. And look, he's definitely lost some, right? He's not getting the same reactions coming out that he was 6 months ago or 9 months ago. It's fizzled out a little bit, right? They're not sitting on their hands. They still like him. But yeah, the peak of that organic reaction has passed. Can he recapture that and get that back? I believe so, yes. I agree with him. That story is still fresh. And when they're ready to revisit that story, because right now he's not even on the same brand with the Intercontinental title. But at some point when they're ready to revisit that story, it won't be very hard to get the people behind him. And let him go out there and let him cut promos and talk about how much it would mean to him to win that championship, how much it meant to him growing up as a young wrestling fan to see people like Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels and Mr. Perfect and Razor Ramon holding that title. It's the one big achievement I have yet to, add to my resume that I must do before I hang up my boots. Right? That's a very simple story for people to get behind. It just comes down to the timing. This is also now back-to-back pay-per-views with no undisputed tag team title defense. After the tag team titles just headlined night 1 of WrestleMania for the very first time. Back-to-back shows without a title defense. They were left off Money in the Bank, and they were left off SummerSlam for good reason because Kevin Owens is out dealing with a fractured rib. So they just left Sami Zayn off the show completely. He was not in the Battle Royal. He did not factor into the Bloodline stuff at the end. He just wasn't on the show. Owens sat down with Ariel Helwani a few weeks ago, and it just dropped in the last few days. Sat down with Ariel for a 35-minute interview, and it's a great interview. Owens, I could listen to Owens talk wrestling all day long. And he's very open and very honest, I felt, so I enjoyed it very much. But one of the things he admitted to is being frustrated. There's that word again. He admitted to being frustrated by how the tag team titles have, in his mind, been positioned coming out of WrestleMania. He said the Usos did such a tremendous job with them and elevated them to a main event spot at WrestleMania, and he feels that since then, they're putting the work in the ring, but they don't feel as special as they did then, and it bothers him because he wants to do right by them like Jimmy and Jay did. Kevin Owens and Sami Zayn are not to blame for that. They are out there on Raw most weeks, putting the work in, having great matches. They've been one of the few bright spots of that show since WrestleMania. The problem lies with the tag team division and the booking. There just aren't that many compelling teams. You have the Judgment Day, which has already been done on TV. They've already done that, right? Then against Owens and Zayn. You have Imperium, who should have been built up over these past few months so that they could challenge for the titles at, let's say, SummerSlam. Instead, they blew them off on TV. Ludwig Kaiser, he won a singles match on Monday against Matt Riddle, and I couldn't remember the last time I saw this guy get his hand raised. Singles or otherwise. I was starting to think maybe this guy had a bad rotator cuff, that the referee wasn't allowed to raise his hand. So why? Why? How could they book Gunther as strongly as they have and have him surrounded by 2 lackeys who can't win a match to save their life? How were they not being prepped to challenge for the titles? The Alpha Academy and the Vikings, they've been feuding for months. Neither of them have even been hinted at as title contenders. They're hitting the reset button on the Street Profits right now. We saw that on SmackDown Friday night. They came out in suits. We're standing shoulder to shoulder with Bobby Lashley. I like where that's going. I'm interested to see where that goes. But they're only first hitting the reset button on them now. The New Day, they're out hurt. They debuted Indus Sher with Jinder Mahal on Raw. They gave them a couple of squashes and then nothing. We haven't seen them since. On SmackDown, they do have the Brawling Brutes. Pretty deadly. They were getting pushed, but then Prince got hurt, so that got derailed. Gargano and Ciampa, if they ever reunite DIY, they would make incredible opponents for Kevin Owens and Sami Zayn. If you were to ask me, what is the one match that you want to see with Kevin Owens and Sami Zayn for those tag team titles, above all else, that they could believably do? I'm not saying start fantasy booking with teams from other promotions. What is the match that you want to see with Kevin Owens and Sami Zayn? That's the match. That's the match. And even if they were to do that, that's months away from happening if that ever happens at all. Right now, the whole DIY thing, it's just fantasy booking. Gargano hasn't even been on television. You'd have to first reunite them. You'd have to educate people about their history. You'd have to have them start racking up wins. It's like breaking them down to build them back up again, right? On a totally new roster in front of a totally different audience. So even if we get there, right? Maybe that could be a WrestleMania match next year. There is no competition. This was always going to be a problem after WrestleMania if they did not take steps to address the issue, which they did not. The reason the tag titles were elevated was because of Roman Reigns and the Bloodline story. That's it. Unless they're with the Bloodline or the Judgment Day, it's going to be an uphill battle because those two groups are taking up so much of the oxygen on these shows. In their hands, they make the belts feel important. Anyone else's hands, it was always going to be a struggle. So Owens has a right to feel frustrated, but he shouldn't feel responsible for that because there's only so much that he can do. I don't blame him and Sami Zayn for that. He also said he's got 1.5 years left on his contract, and he's not sure how much longer he plans on wrestling for. He says he gets a lot of pleasure out of helping other people now behind the scenes, more than he does even his own stuff. Which he told Triple H this, and Triple H said to him, yeah, me too. 6 months ago, he would have said that he would be wrestling 5 to 10 more years. And he says he still might, but honestly, he isn't as sure now about that. He said if he had the choice of what to do at WrestleMania 40 next year, what he thinks would be the most fun, it would be a match with Finn Balor. I am still blown away, no matter how many years go by. I'm still blown away that the Kevin Steen guy that I saw in that singlet for the first time in Ring of Honor all those years ago went on to not only be a big star in WWE, at a time when they were not bringing people in who had the physique of a Kevin Owens, let's just be honest. Not only did he go on to become a big star in WWE and win every major title, but went on to main event back-to-back WrestleManias, one of which was against Stone Cold Steve Austin. If you would have told me that in 2007, I never would have believed you. I don't think he would have believed you. He's done everything that you could possibly do outside of winning a Royal Rumble. You know, he's on bonus time now.